In 1997, Silicon Valley was just getting started. My name is Quentin Woodrow. I was 27 years old and working in programming at a tech startup. Silicon Valley was on the verge of a bubble economy, but things were still very simple. I walked to the office every day, passing tree-lined streets where the sun cast brilliant shadows on the ground. Across the street from my house is a family of Mexican immigrants who bake tortillas in their backyard every morning, and the smoke from their cooking wafts past my window. I loved this peaceful, quiet rhythm of life, and I was very happy. I met her at the intersection of Delilah's house on a summer afternoon. I had packed a lunch from a new Mexican restaurant at work and was going home to eat it. She was walking towards me with a shopping cart, her long hair slightly raised and set in the sunlight. I couldn't help but look at her a little more, and her figure made my heart race. To my surprise, the same scene happened again and again, and for 3 weeks we met every day at the same intersection. She pushing a shopping cart and I carrying a lunchbox, and Delilah smiled and said, "Don't you live in the neighborhood too?" I answered truthfully and introduced myself by name. She told me that her name was Delilah and that she was the only single woman on the street. I wasn't sure if she meant it or not, but she was definitely giving me a hint. We began to talk often on the street corners, and gradually she revealed her work and life to me. She was an elementary school teacher who had moved to this town at the end of her career and was living a life of leisure with some inheritance. She confessed that she was interested in putting down roots here, seeking a possible connection. It was almost impossible for me not to be moved by this revelation. So I asked her for her phone number, and we started dating soon afterward. Delilah loved arts and crafts, and we often went to the opera, galleries, or balls together. She had a graceful beauty that made everything around her elegant. I would clean the house and cook for her myself. Sometimes she would insist on going out to a restaurant, and I was happy to oblige, appreciating her sense of humor and her willingness to save her life. We began to go hiking together, enjoying the tranquility of the mountains and the beauty of nature. Delilah likes to ask me about my work, and I tell her about the booming trends in the world of computer programming. With our position as pioneers of intellectual property on the internet, the company is on its way to becoming a leader in the industry. We've just developed a new web design language that allows data to flow smoothly over the internet. Delilah nods her head in disbelief, but I can't see the curiosity and appreciation in her eyes. She has never given up on being a good mother and homemaker, but at the same time, she admires my dedication and commitment to my career. This kind of work-life balance is exactly what I am looking for in my spiritual home. A year later, in the spring, I proposed at the restaurant we frequented. It was in a quiet, wooded area in the mountains, and behind the restaurant was a small lake, the water sparkling in the setting sun. I had gone to pick out a diamond ring and had been saving up for a while to save up enough money. As we cooled off by the lake, I took a deep breath, got down on one knee, and asked Delilah to marry me. With her hands over her mouth and tears of happiness in her eyes, she gently nodded her head. I couldn't believe it at that moment. I felt like I had the whole world to myself. After we got married, we moved into a small house in the west, across the street from a creek. We would walk there every morning, sometimes jogging a few kilometers together, sometimes picking up pebbles to take home as souvenirs. Delilah would always judge me, mocking me for sitting in front of the computer for so long that I was too thin. She said I had to work out more often to stay healthy. At night, we cuddled up together and listened to the sound of the babbling brook outside the window. At that time, we were young and full of passion, looking forward to the future with a lovely child, to complete a happy family. Life was just like that gentle stream, gently moving forward into a wider distance. But just a few years later, things began to change in a subtle way, with Delilah first showing some slight dissatisfaction with my work and feeling that we were seeing less of each other. I explained that the company's projects were expanding rapidly and that I had to devote more time to them. But she didn't seem completely convinced, and she always had a wandering look in her eyes. Some nights I still have to work overtime in the wee hours of the morning, boot up the computer with its cozy green code screen, and work quietly until the sun comes up. When I'm alone, I often think back on all the good things I've done in the past and ask myself if I should have been more involved in my family's life instead of being too attached to my work. But in the next moment, I think it's just a little slip of the tongue, and it's not that big of a deal. You can always get back to what you should be focusing on, can't you? Then Delilah began to go to bed late and wake up late, sometimes waking up after I had left the house. And when I came home, she was sometimes still asleep. There were times when I saw leftovers from the day before on the dining room table. But she always looked tired, so maybe she was just adjusting to the new rhythm of life. That's what I explained to myself. Until one day, everything changed. It was a sunny weekend afternoon, and I was walking home after buying lunch ingredients at the neighborhood supermarket. Just as I passed the small cafe we frequented, a familiar figure appeared in the corner of my vision. It was Matthias, a close friend from my university days. I should have been happy to see an old friend I hadn't seen in years. But what disturbed me was the fact that he was accompanied by someone else. Wasn't it my wife, Delilah? The two of them seemed to be talking intimately about something, with smiles and laughter on their faces. At that moment, I couldn't look away, and my body seemed to be pinned in place. A suspicious uneasiness rose up inside me, like a tiny sliver of ice, melting quickly and spreading all over my body. I immediately turned around and left, hurrying back home. However, that image lingered in my mind, never to be put down. A strange and unprecedented feeling of fear came over me, like a dark beast that jumped out of nowhere and enveloped me in it. My heart was pounding so hard that I couldn't catch my breath. I sat on the sofa, my mind plunged into a gray haze, and I could not wake up until the sky darkened. At that moment, I knew that the appearance of Matthias, who had been away for a long time, would bring me an unpredictable shock and change. Ever since the day I saw my wife talking to Matthias in front of the cafe, a dark cloud has been hanging over me. Although I continued to go to work as usual, I had trouble concentrating and was often distracted by thoughts of my wife's relationship with my best friend. I began to wonder if there was some kind of intimacy between them that I was not aware of. Delilah allowed me to ignore this. Sometimes I would take the initiative and ask her for a definite answer. But each time, she avoided it by digressing or simply denying it, making the atmosphere between us even more tense and awkward. "Quentin, are you doubting me? Why are you doing this?" At one point, she looked resigned, and there was an unmistakable emotion in her tone. "I just want to know the whole story, honey." I tried to stay calm. "You and Matthias used to be best friends who talked about everything. If something really happened between you two, I'd rather you were honest about it." She shook her head and frowned. "That's just your suspicion. Don't bother yourself. Matthias and I are just old acquaintances who have met and exchanged pleasantries." I wanted to believe her, but did it make sense? How can a man and a woman, especially if they were once close friends, not have any thoughts about each other beyond friendship? Isn't this kind of secret thinking the root cause of all cheating and extramarital affairs? I began secretly investigating my wife's and Matthias' whereabouts in order to uncover the true nature of their relationship. I soon realized that since Matthias had reappeared, Delilah had begun to talk and laugh mysteriously on the phone at home, then hang up when she saw me come in. Sometimes she would leave the house for an hour or two in the evening under various pretexts, wandering around alone. At the same time, I'd run into Matthias near his house, and he always looked like he couldn't get enough. The signs couldn't have been more obvious. I was not ignorant and soon realized that my wife was having an affair with my best friend. But was it simply a mental affair? Or did it go further and become a real relationship? This made me uneasy. One day, I was working late at the office and left around midnight. On my way back home, a bold thought occurred to me. If I went to Matthias' house now, I might catch him in the act. After a few seconds of thought, I sped towards Matthias' house. It was a villa in a quiet neighborhood that I had visited a few years ago as a close friend. As the car approached, I noticed that the front yard was brightly lit, and there was a familiar car in the garage, the same car that Delilah always drove. No longer able to suppress my inner suspicion and anger, I hurriedly turned off the engine and got out of the car, approaching the porch of his house on foot. Through the screen window, I could clearly hear two people whispering and laughing in a lowered voice from inside. I could hear two people whispering and laughing. One of them was my wife's familiar voice. "Delilah, darling, let me kiss you one more time." It was Matthias' low, magnetic voice, and I certainly didn't recognize it. Then there was a creaking of the couch, probably because they were kissing and hugging each other. A feeling of sorrow and humiliation welled up in my chest, and just in the nick of time, I pummeled the door with uncontrollable force. Enough. Enough. You two sons of bitches. I saw it all. Quentin? The wife's frightened voice from inside. What are you doing here? Come on, go away. You're mistaken. Fuck you. I saw what happened. I don't need you to explain. I slammed the door so hard my fist almost made a hole in the wood. Quentin, man, calm down. It was an oversight, trust me. Matthias was also explaining loudly from inside, but I couldn't listen to any more excuses. Delilah, you cheap bitch. I never want to see your face again. Get out of here. I hissed in agony and almost collapsed in front of the door. I spent that night in the car. When I woke up the next day, my wife had left. A hastily written note was left on the table. I'm sorry, but we need some time apart to cool off. That's all that happened. I spent a full month after that to organize my mind and stayed in a hotel. My wife's whereabouts were unknown, and I just repeated my work mechanically, relying on my friends in the office to slowly get out of the darkness. But nothing could be heavier than the sting of witnessing my wife cheating on me in someone else's arms that night. Just like that, my life collapsed in an instant. Life is like a blank sheet of paper that is pure and unblemished when it arrives, but after such an experience, an indelible stain has been put on it. I have fantasized that if I could do it all over again, would I be able to avoid such a nightmare? Delilah's departure left me in an unprecedented state of pain and confusion. Day in and day out, I became unable to concentrate on my work, just staring blankly at the computer screen. The only image in my mind was the scene of my wife kissing her lover, and it tormented me all the time. I was fortunate to have a lot of attention and care from my colleagues in the office during this difficult time, and Rachel, a close friend of mine, dragged me to the bar several times to relax. Quentin, stop feeling sorry for yourself. She reassured me. Delilah has made her life choices. You just have to look at yourself and make a new start. In the drunken atmosphere of the bar, my mood was a little lighter. But when I returned home, I felt empty and desolate. The picture Delilah had given me for our wedding anniversary sat alone on the dining room table. I slammed it down and the glass shattered, leaving the room silent. Just when I was at my most troubled, an incoming phone call shattered any notion that I had run away from my wife. It was Sienna, Matthias' wife. Hello, Quentin, it's Sienna, came a choked female voice on the other side of the call. I have to tell you something. Listen, your wife and my scumbag husband are secretly having an affair. I found out everything. Holy shit, man. Where the hell did she learn this amazing secret? I was at a loss for words. Quentin, are you still there? Sienna's voice was even more mournful. I happened to see them out and about, and it was unbelievable. Not only that, but just the other day I found that pregnancy test Delilah took recently, and she's pregnant. Based on the timing, it must be my asshole husband's illegitimate child. My body was struck by lightning, and I stood in a daze, as if my cell phone had become a huge weight. Quentin, you must leave that shameless bitch. Your marriage has come to an end. Let it end once and for all. Sienna hissed in pain. Not only that, I'm divorcing Matthias right now. From now on, you and I are one. This terrible news undoubtedly gave me a fatal blow. Wife is pregnant with another man's child, which is my self-esteem and dignity is what a blow and insult. I finally made up my mind to cut off the marriage with this dead fish like rotten stench. Delilah, however, did not seem to realize this. When I called her home for another showdown, she was filled with fear and shame. Quentin, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. She cried and knelt down beside me. Please, give us one last chance to start over. I swear, I'll be a perfect, good wife again. That's enough, Delilah. I yelled through gritted teeth. Do you think I'll ever forgive you? You're a slut and a bitch. Have you lost all sense of decency and decency? No, let me explain. It was just a momentary lapse. I'm still in love with you, Quentin. We've been together for so many years. How can you just abandon me? She cried out in anguish. It took everything I had not to act out of control. I'll give you a chance to work it all out, but that's up to you. I took a deep breath. Now you tell me, whose baby is it? It's Matthias. She lowered her head and whispered, "Good, I just had to hear it from you." I roared and pounded the table. "Delilah, this is the end of the line between us. You've deprived me of all possibility of forgiveness. I don't want to see you anymore. Get out of my life." She was paralyzed on the floor, covering her face and sobbing silently. I held back the sadness in my heart, dragged her up, and pushed her out of the room. After that, we went our separate ways. She carried the bastard child in her belly, and I set out on a journey to survive alone. Delilah's BFF Rebecca also came to mediate. "Quentin, you have to give Delilah a chance to learn," she pleaded with me. "She's so guilty right now, and if you forgive her, she'll be a good, decent woman again. You were such a loving couple, and yet I'm indifferent. We're not all saints. We all make mistakes. But you can't joke about marriage. Since she has committed such a serious act of betrayal, it's hard for me to forgive her. Rationally speaking, I have no attachment to this marriage. But some nights, I still toss and turn, remembering the good times we had when we first met. Delilah was so innocent and sweet. How could she have fallen so far? What did I do wrong that made her end up on this path of no return? Everything has become a regret forever. I must admit that I was in a state of confusion and pain that I had never experienced before. I could barely hold down a job during the day, but when I had a spare moment, I could not help but fall into endless reflections and memories of the past. My friends in the office were considerate enough to give me enough space, and no one bothered me too much. Rachel and David used to keep me company at lunchtime. "Quentin, it's okay to be sad, but you have to move on," David said. "The marital problems are just a blip on the radar. You're still young and have a lot ahead of you." I nodded. He was right. But I knew that time would not be easy to heal this kind of trauma. I've tried to heal in ways such as running hard for a few miles in the park and letting the exhaustion wash away the pain for a while. After a workout, I'd sit in the shade and catch my breath, and my mind would drift back to the past. Delilah leading our first child into school, her work in our kitchen, our laughter as we walked hand in hand around the lake. How could it all have been so good? And how could it have come to this? It took everything I had to get the visions out of my head, and I closed my eyes tightly, telling myself that it was all over. When I reopened my eyes, I realized that Sienna was standing not far away, with dried tears on her face. "Hey, Quentin, can I talk to you for a second?" She waved at me. "Oh, Sienna, it's you. Well, sit over here." She sat down next to me, looking a little nervous. "I can feel what you're feeling right now, because I'm going through the same thing. That asshole Matthias, he's a piece of shit." I smiled bitterly. "Yes, we both can indeed say that our bad luck comes from the same source. But you were at least spared that sad ending, you know?" Sienna said meaningfully, "I'm grateful that you saved us both in time." We were silent for a while, and Sienna suddenly turned her head to look at me with a complicated look in her eyes. "You know, Quentin, I had a certain crush on you at one point." "Huh? What did you say?" I looked at her in surprise. "You don't have to make such a fuss. We're all just sad victims. However, I admire the fact that you have never indulged in it, and that you have remained pure and kind." I was silent, just nodding slightly. After Sienna left, I sat in the same place for a long time, lost in thought. Her words reminded me that although married life is strange and twisted, if I can learn some philosophies from it, I can consider it as a valuable experience. At least I hadn't fallen to the level of Matthias scum, and I was better than Delilah. I should be thanking God for stopping my losses in time, instead of being dragged into an even bigger quagmire. Back at the office, I gradually got back to focusing on my work, and Rachel and David would occasionally bring me food and tease me that I'd lost a lot of weight lately and that I was almost dry as a bone. "Oh, come on," I'd respond with a smile. "Programmers don't always have to live day and night." This simple joke made me feel more relaxed and at ease than ever before, as if I had gotten out of a long night. Everyone in the office encouraged me with their actions. Margaret took me to her church meetings, and Tom invited me to play golf every weekend. They all showed me that my current situation was not the end of the road, and that there was still hope and possibility if I was willing to take that step and rekindle my passion for life. I once spent a night drinking into the wee hours of the morning without realizing what I was doing to drown my sorrows. I woke up the next day with a splitting headache, only to find Rachel sitting on the edge of my bed with a cup of coffee in her hand. I couldn't tell whether it was a dream or a real thing, but I felt the warmth of this friendship, and it made me sigh with appreciation. I knew that I had to pick myself up and not lose myself in the pain of the past, and Rachel made a good point that Delilah had made her own choices in life, and I needed to find a new way out and hope for myself. Work, sports, socializing, friends, and family have all been a source of strength for me to come out of this situation. I thank them from the bottom of my heart for all the goodness and kindness in this world. In the process, I didn't deliberately avoid anything to do with Delilah. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of her in the street or at the supermarket from the days when she was a child. Sometimes I couldn't help but stop and look at her to see how she was managing on her own and whether she had partially reflected on what she had done before. But I don't intend to reach out to her because everything between us is over except for the finalization of the divorce. Thus, with the encouragement and support of my friends, I came out of the darkness and embraced life again. In retrospect, those were indeed the darkest, most turbulent, and painful days of my life. But the God of destiny is often a dark vulture, and living means facing everything bravely, and I have drawn enough strength and courage from it. The encouragement and support of my friends really helped me to gradually get out of the darkness and rekindle my enthusiasm for life. For a while, I even thought I had put the pain of the past behind me and was looking forward to a fresh start. It was at this point that a heartbreaking event took place. It was a sunny weekend morning and I was at home taking care of the house. It was close to noon when the doorbell rang. I answered the door and saw Delilah standing in the doorway with a guilty look on her face and her hands subconsciously shielding her stomach. "Quentin," she whispered my name through her tears, her eyes full of repentance and remorse. I glared at her in anger, and for a moment, I almost wanted to close the door and shut her out. But soon, reason prevailed. I took a deep breath, pushed down my anger, and turned my back to let her in. Delilah walked slowly into the living room and sat down on the sofa, her face full of pain and remorse. For a long time, she didn't say anything, but gently rubbed her hands over her bulging belly, her eyes flickering. Eventually, she spoke, her voice breaking with a choked sob. "Quentin, I know you'll never want to see me again. I just wish I could see you one last time." I waited expressionlessly for her to continue, and Delilah bit her lip, as if she was trying to think of something extremely difficult to say. "I know I've wronged you. You must hate me so much for seeing me fall to this state." She confided slowly, "I hate myself too, for my weakness and greed. I only hope that one day you will be free from this pain and live the happy life you deserve." I stared at her, as if a hot iron ball was stuck in my throat, almost suffocating from the pain. I thought I was ready to make a decision, but the scene in front of me filled my heart with conflicting emotions, and I almost softened. After a long time, I finally spoke in a hoarse voice, as if squeezing the last ounce of strength from my heart with every word. "Get out of here. Now. Get out of here. I don't want to see you again." Delilah looked at me helplessly, her eyes dulled. She sighed and slowly got up. "Goodbye, Quentin. Maybe this is God's final judgment on us." "Shut up. I don't want to hear another word from you." I cut her off violently, my voice twisting with rage. "Get the hell out of here." Delilah's eyes widened in horror, and she turned and fled from this place. The door slammed shut behind her with a muffled thud. For a long time after that, I was in an empty state, losing all sense of reality. It was not until the sun set and the room darkened that I gradually came back to myself. I dropped to the carpet, clasped my knees in dismay, and cried out in anguish. The last rays of the sun shone through the blinds, warming my body but not my heart. It was at that moment that I realized that everything between me and Delilah had really come to an end. She never gave us a chance to start over. Maybe she never really loved me or the marriage in the first place. Over the next few months, I gradually packed up all of Delilah's personal belongings, some of which I burned to the ground. She and I had reached a point where we couldn't make sense of each other anymore, and anything left behind would only be like a sharp steel needle, tearing my wounds open again and again. I had to cut everything out completely in order to let this marriage wander away from my life. Just when I was ready to start my life over, an unexpected divorce decree arrived in the mail. I opened it and saw that Delilah had taken the initiative to split her assets in two. I read it over and over again and finally signed my name on the agreement, agreeing to the end of the marriage. Then one day, I finally made up my mind to go to Delilah's new house. It was an ordinary apartment building with an empty street in front of it. I walked up to the door, but I didn't have the courage to ring the bell. I finally slipped the divorce papers into her mailbox and left without leaving a message. I understand that Delilah is now alone and will be preparing for the birth of her baby. Even though the child is not from our marriage, I sincerely hope that she will reflect on herself and become a good and decent person again for the sake of the child's future. As for me, after all this trauma, I was about to let go of the past and start a whole new life. The happy, life-loving Quentin would be back, and Delilah would be gone forever, leaving me with a mixture of beautiful and painful memories. The day I left Delilah's apartment, the sun was setting, and the streetlights were lit up one by one, seemingly illuminating the path to my future life. Perhaps this is the final judgment and forgiveness of fate, allowing each of us to carry our guilt and trauma and slowly atone for our sins in our limited lives. My love for Delilah was once so pure and beautiful and persistent, but all things must pass away, and even the good things must decay. We all make promises of eternity when we are in love, but the reality is often so hard to realize that it can easily turn our dreams into nothing. From the very beginning, Delilah has a certain kind of emptiness and rebellion in her heart. While she pursues romantic excitement, she also longs to be filled and saved. But I, an introverted and reticent programmer, was too rational and calm and lacked the passion to fully capture her heart. I am not without fault. I often put too much energy into work, intentionally or unintentionally ignored the spiritual and emotional needs of his wife. Marriage should not be just two parallel lines, but with sincere love and care to heal and nourish each other, the inner world of each other. Now it's all gone, a permanent mark on my heart and Delilah's. The love I once felt for her has now turned to pity. She eventually chose the rocky and distant path of no return, far away from my world. When the divorce papers were signed by both parties, the marriage was truly over, and we needed to start over. The last rays of the setting sun quickly disappeared into the horizon. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, feeling it slip through my windpipe and flow through my body. Yes, I am still young. The road of life is still long, waiting for a new stage ahead. From now on, let us each embark on our own new journey. In the following period, I returned to work, but realized that work alone was not enough. So I started to resume some of my old hobbies: running in the park, writing, playing chess with friends. Gradually, my life became full and exciting again. During these days of reclaiming my life, I deliberately avoided all news of Delilah. I knew that she was about to become a mother, and that the child was destined to become a new bondage on her path to redemption. But instead of dwelling on where she was going, I wanted to wish her well as she set out in a good direction for that child. As for myself, I finally felt a sense of relief and liberation that I had never felt before. I realized that I had completely let go of the past and no longer had any regrets or expectations for Delilah. Like a new person reborn, this new me is youthful, with curiosity and love for the world, boldly embracing all new possibilities. At that moment, I saw myself as a new person, reborn and honest. I was no longer confined to the traumas of the past, but I was looking forward to a bright future. Yes, life is still long, and the road ahead shines brightly in the sunlight. I am grateful for all the suffering I have experienced, for it has shaped me into the person I am today. Let me rekindle the torch within me that will lead me to the shore of happiness. With the encouragement and support of my friends, I have completely recovered from the trauma of my marriage. Looking back, the ordeal was just a phase to get rid of the past. Looking forward, the bright road will lead me to a new faraway place. Sometimes life brings unpredictable twists and turns, and certain vows are inevitably shocked. But the only way to truly overcome pain and confusion is to move forward without fear. I believe that God will ultimately favor the tough and courageous, As long as they adhere to the ideal and persistence will be able to shine again. Those who are only thirsty for the frivolous will eventually fall, while we ordinary people, after the trials and tribulations, will shine brightly. Life is like that. When we come to this world with happiness and enthusiasm, life is a pure white paper. When we suffer from suffering and trauma, the white paper will be added to the eternal traces. These traces are deeply engraved on our souls, constituting the most valuable wealth and wisdom of life. With them, we can look to the future and move forward with certainty. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.